Hello, everyone, and welcome to VMblog's live coverage of the upcoming KubeCon plus CloudNativeCon EU 2026 event, which will take place March 23rd through the 26th in Amsterdam. And today we're joined by Paul Horton, Principal Sales Engineer of Sonatype. Paul, welcome to the show.
David, thanks for having me. Let me introduce myself. Yes, my name's Paul. And I guess my work here is centered on the intersection of security and development, right? Beyond my role at Sonatype, I'm heavily involved in open source community, specifically with OWASP and Cyclone DX, which I'm sure many of the KubeCon attendees will have heard of Cyclone DX, which is one of the leading software bills and material formats. But we're also working on something called the Transparency Exchange API at the minute, or T, which is all about sort of allowing the industry to share and consume software transparency artifacts in an automated manner at scale. So lots of cool stuff going on there. From a Sonatype perspective, we solve a fundamental paradox for cloud native teams. They need to move at a breakneck speed, right, without bringing all the technical debt and security debt with it. And that's really where our solutions come in. We provide automated visibility and governance across the entire software supply chain. So it doesn't really matter whether you're pulling into open source libraries or you're dealing with containers, or as we see, and I'm sure we'll talk about in more detail, AI and coding assistance, right? We're just going to ensure that you've got all those building blocks safely, and you can do that at an enterprise scale.
So let's get a little more specific. What kind of pain points are KubeCon attendees facing in their day-to-day operations that your technology kind of directly addresses? And what are your ideal customers and what do they look like?
Sure, Brian. I guess KubeCon is kind of like the center of speed, right, at the minute, right? Speed creates three very specific points of friction that we see in the trenches right now. The first of those is undoubtedly the AI paradox, right? Everyone is using it for velocity, but as Sonatype's 2026 research shows, whilst AI is definitely giving us a speed advantage, it wasn't necessarily built for quality. And so it's often trained on stale data. It can lack real-time risk input as well. And we're seeing, AI coding agents hallucinate, non-existent open source libraries or picking malicious package versions about 28% of the time, right? And for a developer, that's not productivity. That's a rework nightmare. So that's the point one. I guess two, there's a massive visibility gap, right? And AI just magnifies that because AI makes everything faster, bigger, and we don't see it, right? Because really what that's meaning is software teams are now assembling things rather than writing it. So they don't really understand what's in the box once it's been built, right? They don't give it the scrutiny they might have done in the past. And you can't secure what you can't see, right? Of course, that old adage. And it only takes a single transitive vulnerability to potentially put your entire Kubernetes cluster at risk. So that's point two. And I guess thirdly, we probably talk about the security tax. Okay, teams are always tired of being slowed down in pipelines and things because there's noise, right? Security tools have given them some noise, and in developers, myself included, right? We don't want a list of 1,000 CVEs. We need to know which three matter to this application for our organization and what to do about them, right? Anything less than that is just friction. Okay. Ideal customer for Sonatype, it's pretty much any organization, right? Anyone from a high growth scale up to Fortune 100, that really is trying to choose between moving fast and staying secure, right? We are a platform for teams who want to use guardrails and not gates, and help developers stay where they need to be.
Now, Paul, speaking of customers, to kind of put things into some perspective here, can you maybe share a compelling customer story that demonstrates real business impact? What tangible outcomes did a customer achieve, such as, cost savings, faster deployments, or improved reliability?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess probably a notable example, a large global financial services organization we've been working with, like many KubeCon attendees, they were facing the challenge of managing thousands of developers across lots of fragmented CI/CD pipelines, tool chains, and things, as most organizations have, right, as they grow. They implemented the Sonatype platform, very specifically our repository manager and lifecycle solutions, and that gave them a single pane of glass, so they could see where all open source was coming into the business, and also where it was all being used. And that then allowed them to add security checks, which were automated rather than sort of manual gates, which typically are at the end of a process and brought friction back into their process. So it was quite a shift in their culture. Is the reality, as they embedded those checks into the development flows. But it allowed them to significantly accelerate their release cycles, whilst also strengthening their vulnerability management, right? They got 2 for 1. They weren't just finding bugs faster, they were sort of preventing them from ever being pulled into the environment to start with. So I guess, overall business impact, drastically reduced effort, right? They could reclaim thousands of developer hours that they would have given to rework and triage, right? They didn't have to do that, so they could put that towards actual business value. And clearly that is really a competitive advantage, I would say, rather than than a bottleneck as people might perceive it to be initially.
Now, at KubeCon, the exhibition halls are packed with vendors, all claiming to solve similar problems around Kubernetes. What specific capabilities or innovations and new features should attendees see to choose your solution over alternatives?
Well, I mean, yeah, if you've been to a KubeCon is always packed, right? I guess the fundamental difference, between us and other vendors in our space, right, is that, while the vendors are scanning for known problems, we're providing intelligence that helps, define what the problems are. The models that engineers use to create and manage software are inherently outdated, as I mentioned, right? And I can show you a bit of that later in a demo, perhaps. But they're only as smart as the data they were trained on at that point in time. So they're missing what we would call grounding, right, or real-time intelligence. And Sonatype is uniquely positioned for this. We've got over 20 years of curated open source intelligence, combining proprietary security research we do day to day. We operate Maven Central, which is obviously where the world's Java open source ecosystem is centered on. We have something called OSS index data as well. We've been doing AI, ML risk analysis of north of 270 million open source components, right? These numbers are vast, right? So we've been doing this for so long, right? We identify about 70% more open source vulnerabilities than alternatives out there. Our insights to our customers are on average 10 times faster than, say, the National Vulnerability Database. And that really means you can work faster, like 30% average as a development team. I mentioned the National Vulnerability Database, and we should probably just dig a bit deeper into that, because those who have used it or read the news in the last 12 months, know that in 2025 it had some funding issues through the US government. And actually, they were only able to give scores to 35% of open source vulnerabilities in 2025. Okay, so whilst we know it wasn't accurate to start with, actually, people are sort of relying on something that's half baked, and that again feeds into AI models and things. So when you're choosing Sonatype, you're not choosing another dashboard. Of course, we have dashboards. You're getting a no breaking changes upgrade path. We're not just telling you something's broken. We'll tell you why. We'll tell you which version to go to, and that's just a night and day difference between a tool that's going to give you a list of alarms or problems and a platform that's going to steer you down a path, and that's the difference.
So, not to give away any trade secrets or anything like that, I know Brian mentioned the KubeCon event is growing, and the expo floor is huge and growing every year. So lots of booths, lots of different vendors for people to come by and see. Maybe if you could talk a little bit about what you're going to be showcasing, at the Sonatype booth. What can an attendee who's there and who's coming by your booth, what can they expect to see?
Sure, David. I guess, we're going to be bringing a lot of energy to KubeCon as Sonatype, as we have for the last couple of years, actually, if you've seen what we've done on some of our stands. But our central theme this year is all about providing intelligent open source guardrails for developers and AI coding assistants. So we've got two booths, okay? On one of them, we'll be talking the serious stuff, so you can come and get, see how all our solutions can help function as like an operating system for your software supply chain. So we can demo all our capabilities from advanced dependency management, artifact management, our industry-leading software bill of materials compliance, and our real-time open source malware protection as well. But probably what's going to draw the crowds this year is our activation zone. Okay, we are actually installing two bowling alleys right in the center of KubeCon. So, of course, it's a bit of fun. There's a point behind this, and that's we want to drive home the message of helping folks keep their AI out of the gutter. All right, that's the play on the game. So of course, come down, have a game of 10-pin bowls. We'll show you how we can act as automated guardrails and keep your code on the strike path. And if you get a strike, who knows, you might get some swag to take away as well.
Now, we're seeing some massive shifts in the cloud native landscape, particularly around AI and the workloads involved with that and platform engineering, FinOps pressures. How is your company positioned for these trends, and what is your roadmap that addresses these, where the industry is headed? Particularly AI is driving a lot of that.
Yeah, I guess that's the heart of the conversation this year for most folk, right? Not only Sonatype, but we don't see these three trends as kind of separate challenges. We see a single evolution of the software supply chain. So on AI, it's kind of like that double-edged sword we mentioned. We're accelerating development, but with that comes all the risk of all these dependencies and AI-generated code. So we're kind of uniquely positioned, Sonatype, to be that safety engine to enable that velocity, providing automated governance to allow you to do that AI-driven development without scaling the risk necessarily. From a platform engineering perspective, we're kind of past the security as a gate, right? We integrate directly into the developer platforms, your CI/CD platforms, or pipelines, and the goal there is to make security kind of a background service for developers. They can get the high quality components they need by default. They shouldn't need to be some sort of extra thing they do, right? From a FinOps pressure, I mean, FinOps is always going to be a big topic, right? But I think we're feeling it more in 2026. And security debt is expensive, right? So every hour a developer spends doing some manual rework or triaging, what other tools might give them as noise, right? That's a hidden cost. So by shifting, governance left and using our intelligence to prioritize only the risks that actually matter, we're actually helping lower the total cost of delivering secure software. So they're the three things. Ahead, our roadmap is exciting. Some things I probably can't share on this, but the headline, right, is centered on autonomous supply chain management. So taking our already unique intelligence, getting deeper, so we don't just identify a vulnerable library, but automatically help developers navigate to the safest path, making sure it remediates across what are today's complex cloud native architectures.
Now, Paul, you've obviously given our viewers a lot of great information to digest, but before we wrap things up, I just want to ask if there's maybe one key message or takeaway that you'd want a KubeCon EU attendee to remember about Sonatype.
I guess, it's the message that for 2026, speed and security should no longer be a trade-off, right? For AI, containers, and open source to continue to accelerate the way we innovate, right, which is what we're all trying to do, we shouldn't necessarily be feeling extra anxiety and risk, right? There are better ways to do that. And that's what our vision is here at Sonatype, is to provide the visibility and automation that allows that software supply chain to be transparent and trustworthy. We want to empower the teams to innovate at the speed that AI enables them to do, but also make sure the rest of the organization, right, the risk people, security people, right, they're also happy and that their applications remain secure by design. So, ultimately, we're here to help you move fast. I hope the simplest analogy, we've got seat belts in our cars, right? We didn't put them there to go slow, right? We put them there to be safer while we would go fast. And that's Sonatype.
Now, talking about it is one thing, but we'd love to be able to see kind of Sonatype in action. Is there a demo or a walkthrough that you could kind of show us and our viewers?
Absolutely. Let's get into it. So I'm here. I've got a coding assistant open, and I have just asked it to create me a really simple application. That's a fantasy Formula One race. Okay, I've not really given it much direction, but it's gone away and it has written me something in TypeScript, which is cool, right? You can see the output as it's done its work. And that's great. And if I open the manifest, the package.json, it's generated itself. It's just picked a dependency called chalk. Okay, so if I go and look at Sonatype Guide, which is one of our free open source data sources, and we look up chalk, we can see version 3.0 is from 2023. Okay, so that's just proving the point we talked about earlier. Okay, it doesn't know about anything newer than that. Now, in this case, not necessarily a security issue. Okay, because version 5.3.0 is actually quite clean according to Sonatype's data. But again, if we understand the way TypeScript and these ecosystems work, the little hat symbol at the beginning there means get me the latest version 5.y.z. Okay, so if we go back to this, there was a version after this in September, which actually made a lot of press, by the way. Okay, which actually was malicious. It was a hijack. So whilst today you run your build and it might be fine, tomorrow you might be pulling in a malicious component. And in this case, Claude has no way to help with that. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to connect Claude to Sonatype Guide, okay, which is our MCP server that allows you to understand and benefit from Sonatype's intelligence. So I've got that connected now, and I'm going to just ask it to review the work it did, okay? And let's see what it says. This will take about a minute. Okay, we can see it's still continuing, but you can see it's done the analysis by talking to Sonatype. And whilst there's necessarily no issue with 5.3.0, it does say Sonatype is going to recommend a particular version because it's got a much higher trust score. And some of the other dependencies as well benefit from being newer and of a better quality. So Claude's continuing to make those changes. We can see the manifest file has been updated to 5.6.2, again with the little hat at the end. And that's great. So we benefited from Sonatype's intelligence. You can plug that in from the start, right? So Claude won't spend all those tokens and you waste your money using dependencies that work great from the beginning. But as a little extra kicker, I'm going to ask it a question as well now. I'm going to ask it why it didn't pick version 5.6.1, okay? Which Sonatype knows was a hijacked version, right? So it's classified as malicious. So here we go. It's telling us, this is a perfect example of supply chain security in action. Okay, version 5.6.1 was likely compromised. There are some known, vulnerabilities against it, but also it is marked as malicious in Sonatype's data. So, this is what we mean by making sure you've got some real-time insight, plugged into your AI coding assistants. Sonatype is uniquely positioned to provide that.
Well, thanks for that great demo. Where can people go if they're not going to be attending the event, but still want to learn more about Sonatype? What's the best way for them to reach you?
Sure. Obviously, at KubeCon, we're on booths 688 and 860. As I mentioned, we've got two booths. If you can't be there in person, come and join the conversation, sonatype.com. You'll get access to all our kind of solutions, or guide.sonatype.com, which was the interface we just briefly looked at there. Free to sign up, free to experience some of the stuff we just showed as well. But otherwise, find us on LinkedIn and all the usual places.
Great. Well, thanks for taking the time to speak with VMblog, and we'll look forward to the show.
My pleasure, guys. Nice to meet you.